The wind howled across the frozen wasteland, tearing through the barren plains like knives of ice. The storm had raged for hours, blinding anyone foolish enough to wander outside. But one man kept moving, his heavy boots crunching through the snow, his breath sharp in the freezing air. He was a human explorer, sent to survey the outer regions of the colony world. His visor was covered in frost, his suit alarms warning him of dropping temperature. Still, he pushed on, searching for any kind of shelter before the storm buried him alive. The land was merciless, the kind that swallowed lives without care. Every step felt heavier. His body begged for rest, but he knew stopping here meant death. He told himself he had faced worse storms before, that he only needed to survive one more night. Yet deep inside, a voice whispered doubt. The silence of this frozen land felt unnatural, almost as if something was watching him. Then through the roar of the wind, he heard it, a sound so faint he thought his ears were lying, a cry, thin, weak, and trembling. It was not the cry of the storm, not the groan of shifting ice. It was the cry of a child. He froze, heart hammering in his chest. A child. Out here. Impossible. He turned his head, scanning the white blur around him. At first, nothing, only snow, only storm. Then it came again, louder this time, a desperate sob carried by the wind. His instincts screamed at him to ignore it, to keep moving. Survival came first. Everyone knew that. But something deep in his chest refused to let go. He could not walk away. His legs moved on their own, pushing him toward the sound step after step until finally he saw it. Half buried in a drift of snow was a small figure shaking, a child curled into herself, arms wrapped tight, skin pale blue with frost. Her clothes were thin, ragged, no protection against the deadly cold. She had 2 small horns on her head, and her ears were long and pointed. She was not human. The man's breath caught, an alien child. Her tears were frozen on her cheeks, her lips quivering as she tried to cry, but the sound barely escaped her throat. She looked at him with wide, glowing eyes filled with terror. She was weak, fragile, and moments away from death. For a long moment, he stood still. His mind raced. This was forbidden. Contact with the alien natives was dangerous. It could spark conflict, he had been warned. Never interfere, never get involved. Yet as he looked at her, lying helpless in the snow, something inside him broke. His hand trembled as he reached out. He hesitated once more, then did the unthinkable. He pulled off his thermal jacket, the only thing keeping him alive, and wrapped it around her small body. The cold bit into his own skin immediately, but he ignored it. The child shivered against him, clutching the fabric with tiny fingers as if it were her last hope. The man lifted her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as glass. The storm grew harsher, screaming louder. The snow blinded his path. His strength was fading, but he pressed forward, holding her close. He muttered to himself, "Come on, just hold on." Her head rested against his chest, and for the first time he heard her voice properly. Soft, weak words in a language he did not understand. She was trying to speak, but he could not make sense of it. He only knew one thing. She was afraid. Not just of the cold, but of something more. The cave, he remembered. There was a cave nearby, a hollow in the rocks he had seen earlier before the storm worsened. It was their only chance. He forced his legs to move step after step through waist-deep snow. His body ached, his lungs burned, his vision blurred. At last, through the storm, he saw the dark shape of the cave. With the last of his strength, he staggered inside, collapsing to his knees. The wind still screamed outside, but here there was shelter. He laid the child gently against the cave wall, his own body trembling from the cold. He quickly gathered loose stones and scraps from his pack, his hands raw and shaking as he struck sparks. A small fire crackled to life, weak but enough. The girl huddled close, her wide eyes fixed on him. Her lips moved, and though he could not understand the words, he could hear the fear in them. She glanced toward the cave mouth, then back at him. Her small body shook violently. He frowned. Something was wrong. The storm was not the only danger. He listened, and in the distance, beneath the roar of the wind, he thought he heard something else. Deep, low growls carried by the icy air. The child whispered again, one word that he almost understood, a word that sent a chill deeper than the storm itself. Death. And outside, something moved in the snow. The fire flickered weakly in the cave, throwing long shadows on the icy walls. The man sat close to it, rubbing his hands together, but the warmth barely reached his bones. Without his jacket, the cold was sinking into him fast. Every breath stung his chest like shards of glass. Still, when he looked at the small alien child huddled in his jacket, he knew he had done the right thing. Her little frame shivered beneath the oversized fabric. Her glowing eyes stared at the flames, reflecting both fear and wonder. She had never seen a human before, yet she had clung to him as if he were the only thing standing between her and death. In truth, he was. The man leaned back against the stone wall, fighting exhaustion. His body screamed for rest, but his mind remained alert. Something about the girl's trembling, about the way her gaze kept darting toward the cave mouth, unsettled him. She was not only afraid of the cold, there was something else, something out there. Then it came again. The sound he had hoped was only his imagination, a low, guttural growl rolling across the storm like thunder. The child whimpered, burying her face in the jacket. Her small hands clutched tightly at the fabric. She whispered a word in her alien tongue, soft, broken but heavy with fear. He could not understand the language, but the meaning was clear. She feared the thing outside even more than the storm. His instincts told him to abandon her, to flee deeper into the cave alone. A human life was valuable. His mission mattered. But when he looked at her, so fragile, so close to death, he felt a weight heavier than duty. He could not leave her, even if it meant risking everything. He stood slowly, his breath misting in the dim firelight. His body trembled from cold and fatigue, but his eyes were sharp. He moved to his pack, pulling out the few supplies he carried, a survival knife, a broken flare, a few strips of dried ration. None of it was enough to fight what stalked them, but it would have to do. The child watched him, her expression caught between fear and trust. She did not speak, but her eyes seemed to ask a question. Will you protect me? The man gave her a small nod. He did not know if she understood, but he hoped she did. Suddenly, snow shifted at the cave entrance. A shadow blocked the light for just a moment. His heart stopped. The growl returned, deeper now, vibrating through the ground. The predator was close. He crouched by the fire, feeding it more scraps. The flames leapt higher, casting a warm glow that pushed back the darkness. Fire was his oldest weapon. Fire could scare most beasts, but he knew. This was no ordinary animal. The storm outside roared louder, but between the gusts he could hear it. Heavy footsteps crunching in the snow, circling the cave. The creature was hunting them, waiting for weakness. The girl whimpered again, curling into a ball. Her tiny horns peeked out from beneath the jacket. Her breaths came quick and shallow. The man felt a rush of anger. Anger at the storm, at the predator, at the cruel world that would leave a child to die like this. He made his decision, the unthinkable one. If he was going to die tonight, he would not die running. He would not die hiding. He would fight, not for himself, but for her. He pulled the knife from its sheath, gripping it tightly. The blade glinted in the firelight. He placed a piece of burning wood nearby, ready to use the flames if needed. Then, he turned to the girl, lowering his voice, speaking gently even though he knew she could not understand. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "Don't be afraid." Her eyes widened, shimmering with tears. For a brief second, the man wondered if she truly understood those words. The snow at the cave entrance shifted again. This time, something massive moved into view. Two glowing eyes pierced the darkness, low and menacing. The growl shook the air, deeper, hungrier. The child let out a soft cry, clutching his jacket tighter. The man took a step forward, raising the knife in one hand and gripping a flaming stick in the other. His breath came fast, but his voice was steady. "Come on," he muttered to the shadow. If you want me, you'll have to fight for it." The creature snarled, steam rising from its maw. Its silhouette was massive, taller than any man. Its fur bristled against the storm, and its claws scraped the stone. The air stank of blood and ice. The fire popped loudly, sparks dancing up into the air. The predator flinched for only a moment before stepping closer. Its eyes locked on the girl. The man immediately shifted, blocking its view. He raised the firebrand high, the flames reflecting in his determined eyes. Behind him, the child's voice cracked in a desperate plea. She whispered something again, her alien tongue soft but filled with hope. Though he did not understand her words, he understood the meaning. She was asking him not to leave her, and he would not. Fire in the storm outside. Yet in that silence another sound grew louder. The slow, deliberate breaths of the creature. Its glowing eyes burned like twin embers in the dark, never blinking, never looking away. The man tightened his grip on the knife and the flaming stick. His skin burned from the fire's heat, but the cold in his bones reminded him he was already half frozen. Still, his focus was sharp. His life meant little at this moment. What mattered was the small alien child behind him. The beast moved closer, its massive paws crunching on the snow at the cave's edge. The firelight revealed more of its shape now. Its fur was thick and matted, coated in ice, its long jaws dripped with saliva that hissed as it touched the snow. Each step echoed with the weight of something made to kill. The girl whimpered softly, tugging at the man's jacket. Her glowing eyes begged him to protect her. He did not turn back, he only raised the firebrand higher, letting the flames flicker in the beast's sight. For a moment the creature paused. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air. Its growl rumbled like distant thunder. It hated the fire, but it hated weakness more, and it had smelled weakness in the girl's tears. The man stepped forward, placing himself fully between the beast and the child. His breath steamed in the icy air. "Not tonight," he muttered. His voice was low, steady, as if he were daring the creature. Then, with a sudden roar, the predator lunged. The man swung, the flaming stick wide, sparks bursting into the air. The beast recoiled with a snarl, its fur singed by the fire, but it did not retreat. It circled, its eyes narrowing, looking for an opening. The cave became a battleground. Firelight danced across the walls. Shadows stretched and twisted with every movement. The man's heart pounded, his arms ached, but he refused to lower his weapons. The child pressed against the wall, whispering words in her alien tongue. Soft, prayers or pleas he could not understand. The predator struck again. Faster this time, its claws swiped through the air, scraping stone. The man barely dodged, his knife slashing across the creature's paw. Dark blood splattered onto the cave floor. The beast roared, shaking the walls with its fury. The sound made the child cover her ears, trembling. The man glanced at her only for a second, but it was enough. The predator lunged, knocking him to the ground. His knife clattered away, his chest burned as the beast's weight pressed down on him. Its jaws opened wide, hot breath reeking of death. The man struggled, pushing the firebrand into its face. Flames licked across its muzzle. The beast howled, thrashing wildly. The man rolled free, scrambling back to his feet. His knife lay across the floor, just out of reach. The creature shook itself violently, half blinded by smoke and sparks. It turned its furious gaze back toward the child. The man's heart froze. In that instant he knew. If he failed, she would die. With a roar of his own, he threw himself forward, bare-handed. He slammed into the predator's side, forcing it away from the girl. His fists pounded against its frozen hide. He was nothing compared to its size, but desperation gave him strength. He grabbed the knife, driving it deep into its shoulder. The beast shrieked, staggering back. Its blood hissed as it hit the fire, filling the cave with a sickening stench. The flames grew brighter, as if the fight itself was feeding them. The girl's eyes widened, tears streaming down her face. She whispered again, louder this time, as though her words were meant to push him onward. The predator stumbled toward the cave mouth, snarling. Its glowing eyes burned with hate, but the fire and pain forced it to retreat. It vanished into the storm with a final growl, snow swirling in its wake. For a long moment, silence returned. Only the fire crackled. Only the man's heavy breathing filled the space. His body shook with exhaustion. His arms were bleeding from shallow cuts. His face pale from cold and strain, but he was alive. The child crawled toward him, still wrapped in his jacket. She touched his arm gently, her small hand trembling. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but filled with awe. He did not understand her words, but he understood the meaning. She was thanking him. The man gave her a tired smile, lowering himself beside the fire. His chest rose and fell heavily. The storm outside still raged, and he knew the predator was not gone for good. It would return, perhaps with others, but for now they had survived. The girl pressed closer to him, leaning against his side, her eyes still wet, her body still shaking. Yet in her gaze there was something new, a fragile spark of trust. The man looked down at her, his hand resting on her shoulder. He did not speak, but in his silence there was a promise. He would not leave her. No matter what else came from the storm, and outside beyond the cave another howl echoed through the frozen plains. Deeper, stronger. The predator was not alone. The cave was quiet again, but only for a heartbeat. The fire popped softly, throwing sparks into the air. The man's chest heaved as he caught his breath. His knife dripped with the predator's dark blood. The alien child sat close to him, eyes wide, clutching the jacket tighter around her small frame. But then it came. Another howl, louder than before. It echoed across the frozen plains and shook the air inside the cave. This one was deeper, heavier, not the wounded beast he had driven away, but something bigger. The man's stomach tightened. The first predator had been dangerous enough. If there were more, their chances of survival were close to none. The girl whimpered, whispering in her strange language. Her little hand reached for his arm, trembling. The man crouched beside her, trying to calm her, though his own heart pounded. "Stay quiet," he murmured. His voice was soft, firm. Even if she could not understand the words outside, heavy footsteps crunched in the snow, closer and closer. The cave mouth darkened again. Another shadow stretched across the entrance. Glowing eyes peered through the storm. The child gasped, hiding her face in his side. The man gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening on the knife. He had almost no strength left, but he refused to give in. The beast entered, larger than the first. Its fur glistened with frost. Its breath steamed, like smoke. The firelight caught its sharp fangs as it growled low. This was a hunter, drawn not only by scent, but by the cry of its wounded kin. And now it was here to finish what the other had failed. The man rose, standing between the beast and the girl. His legs shook from fatigue, his arms ached, but his stance was firm. He raised the firebrand again, the flames dancing wildly. He had no plan, no weapons beyond knife and fire, but he had something the predator did not. Unyielding will, the beast charged, snow scattering at its feet. The man swung the burning wood, striking across its snout. The smell of singed fur filled the cave. The predator howled in rage, slamming its body against him. The man staggered, barely keeping balance. His knife flashed, slicing into its side. Another roar shook the air. The child cried out, pressing herself against the stone wall. Her little voice broke into desperate pleas, words he could not understand but felt deep in his chest. She was begging him not to fall, begging him not to leave her alone. The beast lunged again, its claws raking across his arm. Blood splattered on the snow and stone. Pain shot through him, but he did not retreat. With a growl of his own, he drove the knife upward. The blade sank deep into flesh. The predator screamed, jerking violently. Its massive paw slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. The world spun. Fire dimmed in his eyes. His body trembled. But when he saw the beast turn its head toward the child, something inside him reignited. He forced himself up, stumbling. His hands shook. His breaths came sharp and shallow. But he would not let her die. "Over here," he shouted, his voice echoing in the cave. The beast turned. Its eyes locked on him again, and it roared, charging. The man grabbed the half-burned firebrand from the floor. The flames were dying, but the ember still glowed. With every ounce of strength left in him, He shoved it into the beast's open jaws. A burst of fire and smoke filled the air. The predator reeled back, thrashing wildly, its mouth burned. Its roars turned into screams of pain. It stumbled, smashing into the cave wall. Rocks cracked and fell. The fire spread to its fur, orange light flashing across the cave. The man collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, his vision blurred. His knife slipped from his bloody hand. The beast staggered again, then bolted toward the entrance, howling, its body ablaze. It vanished into the storm, its roars fading into the distance. Silence returned once more, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The man's body sagged. He was covered in cuts, his arm bleeding badly, his lungs burned from smoke and cold. He was seconds away from collapsing for good. Then he felt a tug at his side. The girl crawled close, her tiny hands pushing the jacket tighter around him. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes, shaking her head furiously as if telling him not to give up. She pressed her forehead against his chest, whispering words he did not understand, but felt like a plea for him to live. The man closed his eyes for a moment. A faint smile touched his lips. He was broken, bleeding, frozen, but her presence lit a fire inside him stronger than the flames. She needed him, and that was enough. He pulled her close with his good arm, whispering through chattering teeth, "We're not done yet." The storm outside howled again. The predators might return, and the night was far from over. But for now, the man and the alien child had survived another fight. Together, they had bought a little more time, and in that fragile moment of silence, a bond stronger than fear was born. The storm finally began to ease with the coming dawn. The howling wind grew softer, and the white curtain of snow slowly lifted, revealing a world buried in ice. The man leaned against the cave wall, his body heavy with exhaustion. His arm was wrapped in a strip torn from his undershirt, blood seeping through, yet he was still alive. The alien child sat close beside him, her small hands clutching his jacket. She had not slept through the night. Her wide, glowing eyes watched the cave entrance, afraid the beasts would return. When the first pale light of morning touched the cave floor, she tugged at his arm, pointing outside. He followed her gaze. His body ached. Every step felt like stone, but he understood her meaning. They could not stay here. Not after the fire. Not after the beasts had found them. He nodded once, gathering what little strength remained. He pulled the girl close, wrapped the jacket around her small frame again, and stepped out into the frozen world. The snow stretched endlessly, glittering under the weak sun. His boots sank deep into the drifts. His breath steamed in the icy air. The girl pointed again, this time toward the far horizon where jagged cliffs rose like frozen teeth. She whispered something in her tongue, soft but insistent. He did not understand, but he knew she wanted him to follow. So he walked, step after step, his legs heavy, his chest burning. The child held onto him tightly, guiding him with small gestures. At times she pointed to hidden paths between snowbanks. At other times she pressed her tiny hand to his chest as if urging him to keep going when his strength faltered. Hours passed. The storm clouds broke apart, revealing a sky of pale blue. The world felt strangely quiet now, as if holding its breath. After the violence of the night, then as they rounded a ridge, the man froze. Below them, nestled in a valley, lay a village. Small huts of stone and wood stood clustered together, smoke curling gently from chimneys. Strange banners hung from poles. Fluttering in the cold breeze, alien figures moved about, their shapes familiar yet different, taller than the girl, their horns longer, their skin marked with faint glowing lines. The girl's eyes lit up. She pointed eagerly, whispering words that trembled with relief. Her home, he realized they had made it, but the man's relief was short-lived. As they descended into the valley, shapes began to notice them. A group of villagers rushed forward, their movements sharp and alarmed. Their eyes widened as they saw the girl clinging to a human. Cries rose in the alien tongue, harsh and filled with suspicion. The man stopped, tightening his grip on the child. Instinct told him this was dangerous. He had fought beasts, but this was different. These were her people and he was the enemy. The child broke free from his arms and ran forward, shouting in her small voice. She stumbled in the snow but kept going until she reached the group. Villagers knelt to lift her, gasping at her bruises and frostbitten skin. They wrapped her in thick cloaks, their faces soft with relief, but when their eyes turned back to the human, all softness vanished. They raised spears of bone and metal, forming a half circle around him. Their voices rose in sharp tones, demanding, accusing. Some pointed at the knife at his belt. Others shouted words that sounded like curses. The man lifted his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. His body was shaking from cold and blood loss. His vision blurred. Still he held their stares. He had not come to hurt them. He had come to save the child. The girl broke free again, her little feet crunching in the snow as she ran back to him. She threw her arms around his waist, standing between him and the villagers. Her voice rang out in desperate cries. She shouted, pointed at him, shook her head furiously when one of the aliens raised a spear. The crowd hesitated, their voices faltering. They looked at the child, then at the man. Their suspicion remained, but confusion spread among them. Why would she defend him? Why would she cling to the very creature they called dangerous? The man felt her tiny grip on his torn clothes, her small body pressing against him protectively. He lowered his gaze to her, meeting her glowing eyes. She had no words he could understand, but her actions spoke for her. She trusted him, and she wanted her people to trust him too. The villagers began to murmur. Some lowered their weapons, though their expressions stayed wary. One of them, a tall figure with braided horns and a heavy cloak, stepped forward. Their eyes studied the man with a mixture of anger and curiosity. They barked an order, and two others stepped forward, seizing his arms roughly. The girl cried out again, struggling to stop them, but the cloaked figure raised a hand, silencing the crowd. They looked at the girl, then at the man once more. Their voice was deep, commanding, and though he did not understand the words, he felt the weight of judgment in them. The villagers began to lead him toward the heart of the settlement. The girl refused to let go, clinging to his side even as they dragged him forward. Her voice carried through the cold air, pleading, defending, refusing to be silenced. The man stumbled, his body weakening with every step, but inside something stirred. He had survived the storm, fought predators, and carried this child through the snow. Now, as the eyes of an entire village fell on him, he realized the fight was not over. This was no longer about survival. This was about trust, fear, and the fragile bond between two beings who should have been enemies. And as the girl's small hand held tightly to his, he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever judgment awaited, he would face it for her. The man was dragged through the heart of the alien village. His boots scraped across frozen ground as two tall warriors held his arms tightly. The alien child clung to his side, crying out again and again, trying to protect him. Her small voice broke the silence of the crowd that gathered around them. Dozens of glowing eyes followed, filled with fear, anger, and curiosity. The huts of stone and wood surrounded a central square. At its center stood a great fire pit, flames rising high into the pale sky. Around it, carved pillars stood tall, etched with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly in the cold air. The villagers stopped here, forcing the man to his knees before the fire. The girl rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him protectively. Then they came. The elders, from one of the largest huts, 3 figures emerged. Their cloaks were heavy with furs, their horns long and polished. Glowing patterns etched into their skin like marks of wisdom. The crowd fell silent as the elders approached. Their presence carried weight, a power stronger than fear of the storm. The tallest elder stepped forward, eyes fixed on the man. Their voice rang out deep and commanding. The words were strange to his ears, sharp and rhythmic, but the meaning was clear. They were demanding answers. They wanted to know why a human had come here, why he carried their child. The man's throat was dry, his breath fogged in the cold air. He could not speak their language. He had no way to explain. Yet when he looked at the girl clutching him, her small hands shaking, he understood he did not need words. His actions had already spoken. The child stepped forward, still wrapped in his oversized jacket. Her glowing eyes filled with tears. She spoke rapidly, her little voice rising with urgency. She pointed at the man, then toward the distant mountains, then spread her arms wide to mimic the predator's attack. She stumbled through her explanation, her words broken by sobs, but the message was clear. He had saved her life. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, others shouted in disbelief. The elders remained silent, their glowing eyes never leaving the child. She dropped to her knees before them, her small hands pressed together, pleading. She pointed again at the man, her voice cracking as she cried out. The man's chest tightened. He did not know her words, but he felt the weight of her defense. This child, an alien stranger, was fighting for him with every ounce of her spirit. One of the elders raised a hand. The crowd quieted at once. The elder turned their gaze upon the human, their expression unreadable. They spoke again, slower this time, as though testing him. The man lowered his head, pressing one hand to his chest and then motioned toward the child. He kept his movement simple, honest. "I protect her," his gesture said. "I mean no harm." The elders exchanged glances. Their glowing marks flickered faintly in the firelight. Finally, the second elder, smaller and older, stepped closer. Their eyes were softer, curious. They crouched before the girl and touched her cheek gently. The child nodded quickly, grabbing their hand and pulling it toward the human, insisting. The elder straightened, turning back to the others. Their voice was quieter but carried deep weight. The villagers leaned forward, straining to hear. The debate began. The three elders spoke to one another in low tones. Their words carried the weight of generations of fear and memory. To them, humans were predators, dangerous, selfish, destroyers. Yet here was proof that did not fit their stories. A child alive because a human had given his own warmth, his own strength. He knelt. His wounds ached, his vision blurred. He could barely hold himself upright. But still, his eyes stayed on the girl. He feared the judgment would go against him, feared they would cast him out into the snow to die. But if that was his fate, he was ready. He had done what mattered, he had saved her. The debate ended. The tallest elder raised both hands. Silence fell again. Their voice rang out, firm and unyielding. The crowd stirred, some gasping, some nodding in agreement. The words echoed through the square like a verdict. The man could not understand them, but he felt the weight of the decision. His shoulders sagged. He braced for punishment, for exile, perhaps even death, but then he felt a tug at his hand. The girl was smiling through her tears. She squeezed his fingers tightly and pressed her forehead against his arm. Relief shone in her glowing eyes. The elders stepped forward together. One laid a hand on the child's head. The second placed a hand briefly on the man's shoulder. The third raised their staff, striking it against the stone. The meaning became clear. He was not their enemy. Not today. The crowd erupted again, this time with mixed cries. Some shouted in anger, others bowed their heads in reluctant acceptance. A few even looked at him with something softer than suspicion. The girl stood tall, clutching his hand, her voice ringing clear as she spoke words that sounded like a vow. The man's chest swelled. He did not know the future. He did not know if these people would ever truly trust him. But at that moment, he had been spared, not by his strength, not by his weapons, but by the voice of a child. The fire crackled higher, sparks rising into the pale sky. The judgment was made, but the story was far from over. The man and the child stood together before the elders, bound not by blood, not by race, but by survival. And somewhere deep inside him, the human realized. This was only the beginning. The verdict of the elders echoed in the human's ears long after the staff struck the stone. He had not understood the words, but the meaning was clear. He had been spared. The villagers lowered their weapons, though their eyes still held suspicion. Some turned away in anger, others whispered among themselves. The human did not care. All he saw was the small alien girl smiling up at him, her hand still locked firmly in his. She tugged at him gently, guiding him toward one of the huts. The elders gave a brief nod, allowing her to lead him. The villagers parted reluctantly, watching with wary eyes as the human followed the child into the shelter of the village. Inside the hut, the warmth was almost overwhelming. A central hearth glowed with steady fire, filling the space with heat. Furs lined the floor, and herbs hung from the ceiling. The girl urged him to sit, her small hands trying to help despite his weight and wounds. He sank down heavily, his body trembling from exhaustion. His arm burned where claws had torn into him. His chest still ached from the predator's blows. A healer soon entered, an older alien with glowing patterns etched deep into their skin. They studied him with narrowed eyes, muttering in their tongue. For a moment the human thought they might refuse to help. But then the child stepped forward, speaking rapidly, her little voice insistent. She pointed at his wounds, then at herself. Then clasped her hands together as if begging. The healer sighed, finally kneeling beside him. They pressed strange herbs into his cuts, wrapping his arm with strips of soft cloth. The sting was sharp, but the warmth spread quickly, numbing the pain. The human exhaled in relief, his head dropping back against the furs. The child knelt beside him the whole time, never letting go of his hand. Her glowing eyes watched closely, as though she feared he might vanish if she blinked. When the healer finished and left, the hut grew quiet except for the crackle of the hearth. The girl finally spoke, her words soft, uncertain. She knew he did not understand. But still, she talked, her voice gentle like a song. The human listened, his heart heavy yet calm. He did not need to know the meaning of her words. He understood what lay behind them. Gratitude, trust, and something more, something pure. Days passed in the Yai village. The human remained under watch, never allowed to leave without escorts. The villagers whispered whenever he passed. Some spat on the ground, others stared with hard eyes, but slowly, the fear began to shift. Children peeked at him from behind huts, curious. Elders studied him from a distance, weighing their thoughts, but the girl never left his side. She pulled him into games with other children. She pressed food into his hands when he refused to eat. She sat with him by the fire, whispering stories in her alien tongue as if hoping he would one day understand. In her presence he felt something he had not known in years. Belonging. One evening, as the storm winds howled faintly outside, the elders summoned him again. The entire village gathered by the great fire. The human stood tall, though his body still carried scars. The girl held his hand tightly, refusing to let go. The tallest elder stepped forward, speaking slowly, carefully. This time their words carried gestures, signs he could almost follow. They pointed at him, then at the horizon, then at the girl. The meaning struck him. He was free to leave, he was no prisoner. But the choice was his. The human looked down at the child. Her wide eyes brimmed with tears. She shook her head violently, clutching his arm. In that moment he understood if he left she would lose him forever, and he would lose the only bond that had given his life meaning in this frozen world. He knelt, lowering himself to her level. His voice was soft, steady. "I'll stay." She could not understand the words, but she understood the promise. Her face lit up with relief. She threw her arms around his neck, holding him as tightly as her small body could. The crowd murmured, shock rippling through them. The elders exchanged glances, then gave a slow nod. The staff struck the stone once more. Sealing the decision, the human was no longer a stranger, no longer a threat. He was an honored guest, a protector. That night the village feasted. Strange music filled the air. Flames danced high into the sky. The human sat among them, the girl at his side. She laughed for the first time since he had found her in the snow. Her small hands tugged at his sleeve, her glowing eyes shining brighter than the fire itself. The storm had ended, but something greater had begun. The man looked around at the faces that had once glared with hate. Now some nodded at him, some even smiled faintly. He had not erased their fear completely, but he had cracked it. And in that crack, hope had grown. He raised his gaze to the stars, glittering cold and distant above the frozen plains. His breath misted in the air. His body still carried pain, but his heart carried something new. Purpose. Beside him, the child leaned against his side, her eyes closing as sleep claimed her. He pulled the jacket tighter around her small frame, a silent vow in his mind. He would protect her, not because of duty, not because of survival, but because she had given him something priceless, a bond beyond fear, beyond storm, beyond the walls that divided species. As the flames roared higher and the village sang into the night, the human knew his journey had only just begun. But whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, man and child, protector and protected, bound by a promise forged in the ice.